Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review The Dead Zone from 1983. So, I say that simply because this movie was adapted from a novel, and then later on down the road, the novel was, of course, also adapted to be a TV show with Anthony Michael Hall, which, of course, I'd gone on and seen quite a bit of episodes of that. Really good show. I liked it. So I would recommend people watching the show also. Where can you go on and watch the Dead Zone film? Especially if there is a limited number of free options, and heaven forbid, you would want to go on and like rent this movie for a certain number of dollarinos. So there is an app that I had realized recently had gone on to change its look and get updated, because you always have these kind of switches and changes of names and whatever. So like stuff no longer becomes relevant. So you can go on to an app called Doxy, Doxcy, I believe, and be able to download that app and be able to watch the Dead Zone for absolutely free. Or you can go into on a number of bootlegish like apps like Yes Movies or Box UHD within a Google Play Store. I don't know how long that those apps are going to exist for, but you can go and find them and be able to download them and be able to watch this movie for absolutely free. Or the Dead Zone show if that's what you were looking for and you found this instead. So, or for whatever reason you were also looking for the Dead Zone 2022 movie, which is a whole different thing in general, you should go on and check that out on Tubi, because that might be a thing that people were looking into. So, the Stephen King film The Dead Zone. What is this movie about? So, we have Johnny who, via an accident, or a car accident, and I'll explain this more when we get into spoilers, ends up going into a coma for 5 years. He ends up waking up realizing that a plethora of things had changed, and so now Johnny is just left with focusing on rehabbing to be able to get the function of his legs back. But once Johnny is to awaken from his coma, it seems that there may be some side effects of that, where when Johnny is to have someone touch him or he touches someone else, he all of a sudden is to get these unusual visions that lead him to realize that something is going horribly awry with so and so other person, or something is going to happen to the person that he's touching, and Johnny needs to somehow make them aware that this is going to happen to them so he can prevent either their deaths or deaths of people that they, of course, are to know. Or even have at some point where Johnny is to point out killers so that way they can get arrested, and rightfully so. So, Johnny at some point is to get connected with with the police department of Castle Rock. And the funny thing of it is we actually had a Stephen King show called Castle Rock, and like there's a string of murders in there, and so it's kind of funny when we have a thing like Dead Zone that also has a string of murders in a place called Castle Rock. Also, it's like, man, this must just be a town where things are going horribly awry. So Johnny is to help the sheriff's department try and catch this killer, and then afterwards he is to go on into his own seclusion try and live the quiet life, but then he decides to want to teach again. And so that leads him to then start to use his powers again. And that starts to lead Johnny to shake a man's hand, that is to make him realize that this man may end the world. So, really, that is to have us kind of write out this character, because we, of course, have to figure out a way to finish up this story. And so, with that said, I think it's about that time to just go into actual spoilers about this. I surprisingly liked this movie more than I thought I was going to. Even though I have technically seen a bulk of this movie in the past, I really liked this Stephen King movie compared to a lot of the others. Mostly because I just like a person who ends up getting like some psychic gift, and what are they going to use it for? How is it going to come to play? And I really just like psychic gifts anyways, because they're more interesting stories. And I feel that they're honestly, like, to me, I feel like a psychic kind of story feels rare, but that's maybe just me. So with that said, let's, what would be, did I grade this movie? Uh, I would say that The Dead Zone, oddly enough, just feels like a great film. It does. I don't know how, but it just weirdly does. And some people could go on and say no, like it doesn't deserve that kind of a high grading. But I think this is one of the better Stephen King movies, and I can understand why this movie went on to become a show at some point. Because I was like, man, I would love to get more of this, and I felt that like there should have been a franchise kind of thing of this, instead of trying to end it where it ends with this movie. So so yeah, I wish it would have been a show, and then it ended up becoming one. So with that said, let's go on to that double five, because I think it's about that time to just go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time to spoil this movie. So in the very beginning of the film, we have Johnny Smith, who is Christopher Walken, who is teaching his kids the book Sleepy Hollow, which is kind of funny because we have Christopher Walken later on, when Sleepy Hollow ends up becoming a movie. Christopher Walken is in that film, and I'm like, oh my god, like, so, like, maybe all along Christopher Walken was like, heck yeah, I want to be involved in Sleepy Hollow. Like, whatever you have me do, like, I would gladly do it, because like the Dead Zone was to get me interested in doing Sleepy Hollow, or maybe like people like were desperate to just try to get Christopher Walken in this movie somehow, and so, because for the Dead Zone. So yeah, so maybe that's how things just connected together. So Johnny Smith is going on and having his students, and he's reading a certain passage of this Sleepy Hollow story. And then the bell rings, and then we have both Johnny and Sarah, and we have them going through the class, or through the through the school, and Johnny and Sarah, all they want to do is kiss one another, and Johnny's like, well, yeah, but we can't do that, or otherwise we'd get fired. And Sarah's like, well, thank God it's Friday. So Johnny wants to go on and take Sarah on this roller coaster ride, and that is the next thing we end up seeing. we end up seeing both of them together on this roller coaster, and all of a sudden Johnny ends up getting this unusual headache. And he's just like, well, I've never had that happen before. So they both get off the roller coaster ride, and Sarah ends up asking if Johnny is okay. And Johnny's like, yeah, I think I'm fine. I don't know what that was. So Johnny and Sarah run off to their house, and I think it ends up raining by then, so they're kind of like scrambling in there. So it seems like they were going to get into the sheets, let's just say, but Johnny's like, no, I think we should wait a little bit before that. Like, I want to make this special. And so Johnny ends up leaving, and Sarah's like, no, I don't want you to go. And Johnny's like, well, you know I'm going to marry you someday, right? So Johnny leaves to drive off to make his way home. And I only remember it's raining because Johnny, of course, is to kind of wipe his windshield to try to continue on. And so we seem to have this truck driver with this tanker that is to kind of be dozing off on the wheel. And so this character is just driving wildly to the point of him losing his tanker, and all of a sudden his tanker is sliding on the road. And so Johnny, who is to kind of be wiping his windshield consistently so he could see, smashes into this tanker. And the next thing we end up seeing is now Johnny is to have woken up from his coma, and Johnny's parents have miraculously arrived on the one day that Johnny had woken up. So Johnny is to, of course, be at the Wysick clinic. I only know that because I was to take a screenshot of the clinic, and then I realized, like, oh, it's the name of the doctor that Johnny sees in this film. So we have Johnny's mother that mentions to him that he has been under like some spell or something of that. She ends up saying something weird, and then the doctor ends up correcting her to just be like, Johnny, like your mother, what she said was incorrect. I'm gonna let you know now, Johnny, that you've been in a coma. And Johnny is like, well, for how long? Nobody says anything. So Johnny grabs his father and he's like, how long have I been in this coma? So Johnny's father and the doctor are to explain to him, it's like, you've been in a coma for 5 years. And, like, yeah, your legs, like, are no good, and you're going to have to learn how to rehabilitate them. And we also have Johnny's parents that explain to him that Sarah had left Johnny and had gone on to marry, as well as have kids, with a guy named Walt. So Johnny is now crushed and heartbroken. So when he is to wake up from his 5-year coma, he is to realize he is to lose the love of his life, he is to have lost his job, and now he is to have lost also the ability of his legs. And so now we have Johnny who has to go on this learning curve. And to me, like, this whole moment here, like, kind of reminds me of, like, Regarding Henry, the Harrison Ford movie. But, like, Henry in that film, like, had to, like, relearn almost everything. Like, he had, like, complete amnesia, and he had to, like, relearn, like, who he was and how to write and how to, like, and stuff would just kind of pop into his brain, like Ritz or something like that. And then he would figure out what Ritz meant in the film at some point. But I'm kind of bringing up a movie that isn't exactly like this film, but is pretty dang close. So Johnny is going through rehabilitation, and so we even have a point where Sarah arrives and is to be there for Johnny when he finally wakes up. And Sarah is to take off her coat and is to be wearing this dress. And Johnny ends up getting this like wide eyed, like, And Sarah's like, don't look at me like that. And Johnny's like, well, I'm sorry. Like, what was 5 years for you was yesterday for me. So, like, me trying to push away these feelings, like, is very difficult because this is all so new to me where it's been 5 years for you. So Sarah is to try to do the right thing and is to like try to be there for Johnny as a friend, but it seems the more and more Sarah is to push to be wanting to get back with Johnny. Like it's kind of like the Castaway situation where Tom Hanks was to be gone on that island for like 4 years, and then he ends up coming back to Helen Hunt's character, and Helen Hunt is just like, "You said you would be back," and he's like, "I'm sorry," and like Helen Hunt continues to kiss on Tom Hanks and hug him, and she ends up giving him the car and everything like that. They share together. It's just like Castaway. So, where like there's still those feelings there, but they just can't express them anymore because they have their own paths to go. So, Johnny starts to rehabilitate and he ends up getting away from having these certain arm assistants, and then he can go to use a cane. And so Johnny, while at the hospital, is to have one of these nurses go on and touch him. And so all of a sudden, Johnny is to wake up and grab a hold of this nurse's arm and realize that this nurse is to have a daughter named Amy who is in a house that is on fire. Johnny is to try to go on and is to tell Amy to get out of the house because it's on fire. And Johnny then turns to this nurse and is to tell her, it's like, hey, do you have a daughter named Amy? And she's like, yes, like, I have a daughter named Amy. And Johnny is telling her that her house is on fire. And so Johnny continues to grab onto this nurse as this nurse is trying to run off. And so, come to find out, this nurse realizes that Johnny was telling the truth, that this house was on fire. And so the fire department ends up getting called and is to douse out the flames. And so Johnny ends up becoming this like huge news thing because this guy ended up saving this girl from this fire. So after it seems finally Johnny has fully recovered but still needs this cane to get around, when he makes it home to his parents, to his folks, we go on, of course, to have the sheriff arrive at Johnny's place. And the sheriff is to have this like serial murderer in Castle Rock. So the sheriff is asking Johnny, it's like, well, hey, like, we've used every resource that we can possibly find to try and catch this killer, and we've come up with nothing. And so, like, the sheriff is to desperately ask Johnny, it's like, well, since, like, this is to really just seem like we've exhausted all the measures, now we're going into, like, something unknown. Like, Johnny, would you help us? And the sheriff is to go on and tell Johnny, it's like, well, like, can't you just use your gift to help us? And Johnny is to tell the sheriff, it's like, this is not a gift. Like, I had lost like 5 years of my life. I lost the woman I love. I lost the ability to walk, and I lost everything. Like, this is not a gift. And also, every time that Johnny is to use this gift, it feels like he's dying inside when he touches somebody and he gets these visions. So, like, it feels that Johnny is taking a massive sacrifice to have gotten this gift that he did not want. So, we finally go on, and so Johnny at some point is to have Sarah come to his place. And it seems that Sarah is to still have feelings for Johnny. And so Sarah ends up bringing her little son along. And so Sarah comes and meets with Johnny. And Sarah finally gives in to Johnny. And is to tell Johnny, it's like, well, haven't we waited long enough? So while Johnny's father is gone because, or gone to fix bookshelves for some neighbor, because Johnny's mother, after hearing some news about what happened to Johnny, she had gone on and had this heart attack, and then in the hospital had passed away. Johnny had met up with Sarah again, and they had gone at it because they had, of course, still loved one another. And so they're still there while Johnny's father comes back and is like, well, hey, what have you two been doing? And Johnny jokingly says, it's like, well, we've been making bookshelves. Kind of saying that, like, they were going at it, but, like, Johnny used to say, it's like, well, like, his father likes being with this other person just to kind of pass the time, but there's probably something more there. So Johnny is to ask Sarah, it's like, well, hey, like, when is the next time I'm gonna see you? And Sarah's like, well, even if you do see me, like, it won't be like how this was. And Johnny's like, well, okay, I can accept that. So Johnny ends up watching Sarah, like, go off with her kid. So after they have a meal with the dad, as Johnny's to make the joke, it's like, well, yeah, because my father is to get sick of my cooking, so he'll probably like yours. So after Johnny is to be with Sarah and see on the news that the sheriff is still desperate for tips for this murderer, Johnny's like, you know what, I'm gonna go and help. I'm gonna go and help. And the father's like, what? It's like, yeah, I'm gonna help them. So Johnny goes on to meet with the sheriff, and so at first they go down this tunnel. The sheriff is to mention that students used to, or would always go through this tunnel to get a shortcut through school, and I guess someone was to find a body here. And so Johnny was, of course, to say, it's like, well, is there anything that I can, like, kind of put my hands on to see if I can get any visions? They end up giving him a pack of cigarettes, and Johnny touches it, and he's like, no, I feel nothing. And the sheriff is like, well, we kind of assumed that, but we're just trying to test this out. We're just trying to feel things out and see if you can find something for us. So, like, Johnny doesn't touch the body that was dumped there, but so we then push on to have them find out that by this uh what is the word here, there's a little spot that has this kind of what is the word, uh let me pause here for a second. All right. I would normally call this a gazebo, but I don't know if that's the technical term of the place that they go to. Cause this gazebo has like steps and stuff like that, but I would normally call it like a gazebo because that's normally what I'm used to calling this kind of thing. But people have their own technical terms, so they didn't say what this thing was in the movie because I only know that the other thing was the tunnel um, because they said the word tunnel. So, anyways, so they go up to this gazebo to find this girl who is now dead. And so we have Johnny who goes on to inspect this woman, and he ends up touching her, and he ends up seeing how things were to play out. So it seems that we had a man that we couldn't see right away calling this female over because he wanted to show her something. And so we have Johnny who is mentioning that it seems that this girl knew her attacker. And he kept saying, it's like, yeah, like she knows who it is, she's very comfortable with him. And so this guy continues to wave this girl over and is to then get this girl by showing her his coat and opening it and showing her this thing of scissors, taking her down, opening up her her coat and basically all of her clothing on like the top part of her body to then use these scissors on her to then kill her. So we kind of see everything uh, like waist up, so to speak. So, if you know what I mean. So, Johnny is to mention that Dot was her attacker, and then the sheriff is kind of looking around for Dot, and one of the deputies is to mention the sheriff that it seems that Dot had left with the sheriff's car to just go on home, which seems weird. So both Johnny and the sheriff make their way to Dot's home, and sheriff is trying to tell Johnny to stay in the car, and Johnny is too curious to not go further in with the sheriff into this home. So Johnny and the sheriff go into the home, and Johnny is to spot Dot in the window of this house. And so we have Henrietta that answers the door and is to say that her son isn't home. And Johnny's like, well, he has to be home because I just saw him in the window. And she's like, well, he's not. So the sheriff just kind of pushes his way in, and so Johnny touches Henrietta, and Johnny knows that Henrietta knew Dot was to be this killer. So it's like, you knew about this. You knew Frank was to be this killer, and you did nothing. So while the sheriff and Johnny are making their way through this house, we have Frank who goes on to get an assortment things ready. Frank ends up getting himself clothed, it seems, and it's to set up these scissors to have him puncture himself, I'm assuming in the mouth somewhere, because Frank is to just go and open his mouth so widely to where the scissors are going to hit him and make him bleed out. So by the time the sheriff and Johnny find Frank, he's already bled out and he is like kind of dying here. So we have both Johnny and the sheriff assessing the situation, thinking that everything has been resolved. And all of a sudden, we have Henrietta that grabs for Frank's gun. And while Johnny is to head down these stairs, Henrietta, who is to call Johnny the devil, was to shoot Johnny in the chest to where the bullet, I guess, went all the way through. And so the sheriff was to have to shoot Henrietta in the chest, killing her. And so I guess the sheriff had to try to call for an ambulance to try to hope that like Johnny won't bleed out and get killed. So the next thing we end up seeing is there must have been a good amount of time that had passed from that time to now, where Johnny is. Because Johnny had moved away from that town to get his own privacy. And so Johnny had Dr. Sam Wyzek arrive at his place. And so Dr. Wyzek had come to Johnny's place asking him about like, well, hey, like, how is your like chest wound? How is it healed up? And Johnny used to say, it's like, well, yeah, like the bullet went right through me, luckily. So like it was easy for them to just kind of doctor me up, and I'm like I've made a full recovery. So it seems that Johnny is to still get a lot more headaches than he was getting before. I guess he would get them 2 to 3 times a day, and so Dr. Wyzek is to say it's like, well, like that's where I come in. Like I'll prescribe you more medication, and Johnny's like, well, hey, like no matter what, it just kind of feels like I'm getting worse. I'm not getting better. And so the doctor's like, well, like like that's the condition of you going on and getting these disability, is like the drawback is you're also getting these headaches that are going to get worse over time. So because somehow there had been a case of Johnny's that had been documented in the past, so at some point we're going to assume that from these headaches, more than likely Johnny is going to die from them, because I'm just thinking of a Smallville episode where we had a kid who can read people's minds, and at some point his nose started to bleed, and then we realized that like this kid had like some kind of tumor or some kind of something that was possibly going to kill him, and I'm assuming that that might be the case for possibly Johnny, or that these headaches are going to get so bad that they're going to start affecting Johnny's health. So, or that like Johnny's brain is affecting Johnny's health. So we have Johnny that goes on and is to meet with a guy named Roger Stewart, because Johnny is to start taking certain students and he's trying to teach them. And so what happens is that Johnny ends up taking on this one kid who ends up becoming a kid named Chris Stewart. And supposedly Roger is to mention to Johnny that this kid is very shy and he's not come out of his shell, but maybe if Johnny can talk to him or do whatever he does, maybe this kid will somehow change and like be a person who is to be more active and meet people. And so when Johnny does meet with this kid, Johnny is to tell this kid, it's like, well, it seems like you're a kid that kind of keeps to yourself and so on and so forth. And the kid ends up responding back. It's like, well, hey, like, I'm just fine. It's just that my father, like, is to be a person that doesn't like how I am. So Johnny is to take a quick liking to this kid, but he's like, okay, like, I'll educate this kid. Like, I'll go on and like I'll help this kid learn and so on and so forth. Even though the kid seems to be picking up things really well, to the point of again Johnny teaching this kid the Sleepy Hollow story. So we have, of course, while Johnny's continuing to tutor this kid, we wind up having Roger, who is speaking to some political figure named Greg Stilson. And so, come to find out, this guy is running for senator, but this guy has huge aspirations, and like being a senator is just a pit stop to something greater. So Greg is to, of course, ask Roger Stewart for his support and his money. And so while Johnny is to almost shake the hand of Stilson, instead, Stilson ends up giving Johnny this button instead of a handshake, and Stilson ends up walking off, and Johnny ends up getting a consensus of who this Greg Stilson guy is by talking to Roger. And so Roger is to mention that Stilson is some turkey, that he may go on to become president someday. But Johnny, if you ever become a voter, definitely make sure that you vote against this guy. Because there's just something not right about him. So Johnny at one point is to find himself a guy named Walt that shows up at his door, that is to be politicking to get Stilson a new voter, which of course may be Johnny. And all of a sudden, while both Johnny and Walt are talking, while Johnny is to be teaching this kid, we of course have Johnny that is asked Walt, it's like, well, hey, like, you know what, like, I'd love to talk to you, but I'm kind of busy right now. Like, could you just give me like a pamphlet or something like that? So Walt is like, sure, yeah, like, I'll get my wife to give that to you. Come to find out, with how a small world this world becomes, Come to find out, the woman that is to be with Walt is to be Sarah, Johnny's old flame. So Johnny then is to look at Sarah, and they have to admit to Walt that they have met before. And Walt is like, "Oh, like you're Johnny. Like Sarah used to go on and on and on about you, and so you must be that guy." Okay, all right. So, but come to find out, like Walt and Sarah like are to have a kid and then have like a new one on the way. So like it seems like they're going to be. Uh, it seems like they're going to continue um, this relationship. Wouldn't it be interesting in this movie if, come to find out, the latest addition to this family of Sarah's would have actually been Johnny's son, and come to find out that kid had the psychic ability, and that's how they would make a sequel out of this film? Wouldn't that have been interesting? Instead of just kind of uh, playing it out to just be like, oh no, like Sarah just had another kid with this guy, and like that's it. So that's how I would have played the movie out to give us a possible sequel. So Johnny, it seems, is to be more and more interested, I guess, in the political game because Sarah is. So Johnny then does get involved in like, well, I guess like I should really see like who this Stilson guy is like. Because at one point Johnny is to go in to have these news reporters ask him questions, and one of the news reporters Johnny doesn't like, and so because this news reporter is like, well, hey, what's the trick? Like how is it that you can read people? And Johnny's like, well, hey, how about you just come up here and I shake your hand? And so the news reporter is like, oh, okay, all right. So Johnny shakes this reporter's hand and is to tell him how his sister had killed herself and why she did it. And this reporter is like, hey, get away from me. Like, stop shaking my hand. And so it's like Johnny doesn't like to be messed with. And when we have Johnny who ends up getting uh, people that are to think that what Johnny does is just some like parlor trick. It's like, no, it's something much more than that. So we also have Johnny that is to talk to Dr. Wyzak, and come to find out, Johnny from his father has gotten like a whole closet full of letters, people trying to reach out to him to find like lost dogs or missing kids or wanting to know their future. And Johnny is to keep all this stuff, but he's never going to do anything with it just because like he doesn't want to use this gift, and also like it's possibly a reminder um of that he uh like should maybe figure out someday what to really do with this gift. So Johnny goes on to go to a rally for Stilson. And we go on and we have Johnny who finally is to shake the hand of Stilson and shakes it really good to the point of Stilson's assistant is to need to like break up this handshake because Johnny gets a really good handshake from Stilson. And if we already haven't already seen that Greg Stillson is to be this shady guy that is to already had this one reporter have to change his story that is to be put onto this newspaper because Stillson doesn't like it, then we find out that Stillson is going to be responsible for a nuclear war because Stillson was to wake up one day realizing that he needed to go down in history in like nuking everyone. And so we have Johnny who is to realize that Stillson is probably going to bring to the end of the world. And so now Johnny ends up going back to his doctor, Dr. Sam Wyzak, and is to ask him because Johnny was to go on and touch Dr. Sam Wyzak. So Sam, Dr. Sam. And he, of course, was to see that Sam's mother is to still be alive. And Sam is like, well, that's impossible. And Johnny's like, no, like, it is possible. Like, I know where she lives. Like, I know her phone number. And so Sam ends up calling, and his mother is still alive. And Johnny asks Sam, it's like, well, did you call your mother? And he's like, yeah, but like it just feels wrong. It just feels like this was never meant to be. And like I couldn't bring myself to do it. So Johnny ends up asking Sam this question. And it feels like every time we have like a time travel kind of a movie, or like it seems like we have a lot of these situations where how this movie ends kind of plays out in a number of different movies or a number of different shows, where either somebody has either time traveled or is to psychically know the future. The scene that happens at the end of this movie usually plays out in a number of different scenarios, especially when there is a assassin scenario. This movie ends up kind of being the one thing that you always think of, especially when a politician is to get assassinated. But anyways, so Johnny is to ask Dr. Sam Wyzak if he was to have gone on and known before tons and tons of people had died that one man would go on and was to have caused all of that death, all of that pain, all of that agony, so on and so forth. That if Dr. Sam was to have known that Adolf Hitler was to have caused all the pain and all the death and whatever from before this was to happen, would this guy go on and stop Adolf from doing what he was going to do? And Wyzak ends up saying, of course I would have, because I'm a doctor and I want to save lives and I love people. So yeah, I would have, in a heartbeat, if I knew that this guy was to cause all the things that he was going to cause, I would have snuffed him out. I would have killed him. So that gave Johnny the answer that he needed to justify needing to go on and assassinate Stillson to save numerous lives. So Johnny then goes on to leave a letter to Sarah and telling her how difficult this letter would be, but he needed to write this to her. So we have Johnny that goes on to Stillson going on and accepting him being the senator and is going to go on to do this speech. So Johnny is to get this gun and go on this bus and go to this place where Stillson is going to do this press conference. And so Johnny ends up getting this gun prepared to shoot this politician. And so what ends up happening as the guy is getting up to the podium, we have Johnny who starts firing and he misses the first shot. And so Stillson ends up grabbing this baby that of course is Sarah's and positioning this child in front of him as a shield. And so Johnny does not fire at Sarah's child, realizing that it is Sarah's child. And so Johnny ends up getting shot in the process, and he ends up falling over. So Stillson ends up giving back the child to Sarah, and Stillson runs to Johnny saying, like, who are you? Why did you do this? So on and so forth. And so Johnny, who is now touching on Stillson, is to realize that this guy's career, as far as politician is concerned, is over. Because he sees now in Stillson's future that there is a magazine of him holding up a baby in front of his face, and that this guy is done. That this guy is to be in a room where he is going to eat his own bullet, and Johnny is to realize that he had changed the future, because Johnny was to also change the future by having Roger Stewart, who had bought all this hockey equipment for his son, Chris, to have this hockey team together. And Johnny ends up telling Roger that the ice that they're going to skate on for this practice is not safe. And he ends up touching Chris and realizing that they're going to drown in this ice. And so Johnny continues to tell Roger that the ice is going to break. He smacks this thing with his cane. And so Chris completely believes Johnny is telling him the truth. And so when Roger is to ask his son if he wants to go out to this practice anyways, because Johnny was to call off the practice, and then he's like, oh no, like I just told that to Johnny so that way he'll go away. Like, I'm definitely going to go on and continue this practice. Chris, are you ready? And Chris is like, no, I'm not going. And he's like, well, of course you aren't. So Roger goes on to do this practice, and the next day he ends up getting this newspaper, finding out that 2 kids had drowned in this ice accident at this same link, or at this same hockey practice. So Johnny calls Roger's home to find out that Chris is still alive. So he's like, oh, thank God. So when Johnny finds out that Chris is still alive, that's all he needed to know. And Chris is asking, like, Johnny, is that you? And Johnny hangs up the phone. So, realizing that Johnny had saved Chris. And so Johnny ends up telling his doctor about him having that vision, and that he went on and saved this kid. And so the doctor ends up like saying, it's like, well, like that's your dead zone. Like, you are getting this vision of someone dying, and you can step in and correct that. And so like you don't get to see the vision after that, but you can prevent what you're seeing. So like you can go on and correct it. And so it's kind of like Quantum Leap in a way, where Quantum Leap, of course, is to have Sam and Al who go back in time to a certain period because something is to go horribly awry. It could be some disaster, it could be some murder, whatever. And so Al is to try to tell Sam, like, hey, we're here because we need to correct this horrible event and save the lives of more people. To go on and make, I guess, a perfect world. So, or in this case, just to correct like something like small. So Sam goes on to correct whatever this thing is, and then he leaps to the next timeline or to the next person that he is supposed to be, and then Al ends up telling him, "Okay, this is the mission that we're doing," and somehow Sam is to have a number of PhDs and all these things to be able to do anything that he needs to do because he has all this assortment of skills. So, so Johnny, after having Stilson kind of run off or run away from him, we have Sarah who is to grab onto Johnny and say that she loves him and is to comfort Johnny as he dies. And so that's how the movie just kind of fades to black, fades out, with Johnny having to die by the end of the film. Because it technically makes sense to kind of finish off the character with this big event. And this, of course, is the event that he can't come back from. Because if you try to kill a political figure, like, you're going to die. Like, there's no way out of it. And so, yeah. So, with that said, I think I'm just going to wrap this movie up. I know I kind of had to go back to certain points of the film. Or I kind of rushed through certain other points, uh, but yeah, I think I kind of covered most of this film. For the most point, there might have been some moments between both Sarah and Johnny that I kind of didn't completely go into, but good enough for me. Um, I'm just trying to think if there's anything left for me to go on and say. I think good enough. So with that said, I'm just gonna get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.